continuity of care with a known midwife is known to be the gold standard of care. So that's associated with the best outcomes for mums and babies.
Hello everyone and welcome back to There's No Place Like Home. I'm your host Kath, and today I am joined by Rachel, who is on board with us at home actually, but I'm very excited to have you on today, Rachel.
Thank you for having me.
Very excited to dig a bit deeper into your world and what that looks like. So just for everybody listening today, talk to me about what you do and who you are.
Yeah, so I am a private midwife. So I did my midwifery training back in the UK 15 years ago now, so back in 2010. And after my training, I worked as a caseloading midwife for a few years. So that was still in the UK. So caseloading is essentially where midwives see women right the way through their pregnancy, their birth, and through their 6-week postpartum period. So we've got amazing continuity of care there. And then I moved to Australia 9 years ago in 2016 and predominantly worked at a private midwifery practice and doing caseloading again. So still getting that beautiful continuity of care, doing a mixture of home births, hospital births. And then last year I switched things up a little bit and took a step back from being on call because I'd been on call 24/7 for a lot of years and needed to step back from doing that. So I started working in partnership with a private obstetrician and doing antenatal and postnatal care for his caseload of clients and taking on my own shared care clients that birth in the public hospital. And I still have a role now with the private midwifery practice as an educator, so I teach a lot of their parent education classes and their student midwife workshops. And I started working at Beautiful Home as well last year, which is a real pleasure and a real joy.
Amazing. We love having you on board. I feel like I've got so many questions just to compare your training in UK and the care that's given there to even what we do in Australia and what that looks like. You use similar wording like caseloading and, you know, continuity of care, but what do you feel like was the biggest difference for you, or was there no difference?
Huge difference coming from the UK. So, I mean, even just the training is significantly different. So, like British midwives are some of the best trained in the world. We have significantly more hours to our training, and then the midwives then go on to have a lot more autonomy kind of in their role. So the UK is what we call a midwifery-led country, which is where all women have a midwife as their primary caregiver, and that's just the norm. You're pregnant, you would see a midwife throughout.
Wow. And is that generally the same midwife throughout, like for everybody?
Yeah, so there's not much of a private system in the UK. It's predominantly all public. So most people would go through the NHS, and the standard kind of model of care there is to see what's called a community midwife through your pregnancy. So all the GP clinics have their own community midwife that works out of there. So when you're pregnant, you just phone up the clinic and book straight in with the midwife, and then you see that same midwife through your pregnancy, and then that midwife would then come out and see you for 2 weeks afterwards at home after you've had a baby.
Wow.
And that's for people of all risk factors. So anyone low risk would just have midwifery care throughout. They wouldn't ever see a doctor. Anyone with risk factors, they would see a doctor in addition to seeing their midwife. So a doctor would never replace that midwifery care.
Sure.
They recognise the importance of women having that, that midwifery care as their primary source of care. So I find the midwife's role is, I found, probably more valued and more respected in the UK. And the midwives were more in charge, so they were more autonomous. There's a lot of skills I had in the UK that I would just never have the opportunity to use kind of here in Australia. So Australia is what we call an obstetric-led country, which is where obstetricians generally have input into kind of everybody's kind of pregnancy
Mm-hmm.
and birth, no matter what model of care kind of the woman has.
Yep.
There are ways to have more kind of midwifery-led care here, but there's a big private system here, so a lot of people would have a private obstetrician, and people that go through the public system, often they don't know about their options to have midwife care, so a lot of those women would maybe see a GP for their care, whereas like GPs in England would never have any input into pregnancy care just because it's not their specialty.
Yeah.
But so a lot of women will either maybe go down that shared care route or maybe have a mixture of midwife care within the hospital and obstetric care within the hospital. So it's very different models.
Okay. So just so that I can kind of round out a little bit more about understanding about UK midwifery training and, where you sort of enter the system if you're a patient. So these community midwives that sort of connect you throughout your initial journey and then pick it up again post. What is like the interaction between community then with like hospital-based, if that's the way that they...
Yeah, so they're employed by the hospitals, so it is kind of part of the same, and those community midwives do all the home birth. So in the UK, all of the public hospitals offer home birth on the NHS free of charge, so it's a much more accessible option for women to have. So those community midwives have a roster of doing on-call for the home births. Occasionally they might go into the hospital. A lot of them do the odd shift in the hospital just to keep those skills up. But they're all a team. The kind of the hospital team, the community team. They're all part of the one team. It's just separated into the midwives that predominantly work in the hospital and those that predominantly work in the community. Whereas there's just no equivalent in Australia. There's no community midwives that are employed by the public health system that would do that full spectrum of care. You'd have midwives in the public system that go out to do a couple home visits after a woman's given birth, but those midwives wouldn't be doing kind of their full pregnancy care.
So that standard of, what that looks like to enter as a pregnant person is very different to Australia. So you've landed here after you've studied and practiced for some time in the UK, landed here and then gone, okay, I want to do similar here in Australia. So in your intro, you spoke about being a private midwife. What does that look like in Australia?
So private midwives are midwives that work independently from a hospital. So we're not employed by a hospital. We're not directly associated with one, but we do collaborate with them. So private midwives offer kind of full continuity of care to women. So they can do that full spectrum of their pregnancy care, support them through their birth, wherever it is they want to give birth. So private midwives generally do a mixture of home births. They'll go into the public hospitals and the private hospitals to offer birth support. Private midwives don't typically always do the clinical care within the hospital. It depends if they've got admitting rights, which is like a whole other story.
We won't talk about that today.
The majority of private midwives are... if a woman's in labour and is planning a hospital birth, she will go out to her at home and do all of her labour care at home initially, and that enables the woman to stay at home a lot longer than what she otherwise might feel comfortable doing. And then that midwife would then go into hospital with her and then be that birth support and that advocate and that person there to advise her and support her kind of within the hospital. Most private midwives are what we call endorsed midwives. So to become endorsed, you need to have done postgraduate study and have done at least 5,000 hours of clinical practice to then apply for endorsement, because endorsed midwives have additional rights compared to kind of just what your standard registered midwife would.
And we're talking about just Australia at that point, like endorsement in Australia. Assumably, is it just a given in the UK that you have these particular rights, seeing as your training is so much more intense?
Like a lot of the rights we have with endorsed midwives, definitely those were just included in the standard training. There's a few additional things, but essentially the rights endorsed midwives have here is that we have Medicare provider numbers, so we can claim Medicare rebates for appointments. We have prescribing rights, so we can prescribe medications to women. We can order blood tests, order ultrasound scans. So it allows us to give that full scope of care to women rather than them having to see different practitioners for different things.
Yeah.
But yeah, the UK, it was kind of pretty standard that we would just order bloods and ultrasounds anyway. That was just part of what we would do.
Yeah, so the care that you were giving there compared to when you came to Australia, you're now working as a private midwife. Well, given you have sort of done that journey, what do you think the actual benefits that you see of private midwifery for pregnancy care and post are?
Oh, huge benefits. Like continuity of care with a known midwife is known to be the gold standard of care. So that's associated with the best outcomes for mums and babies. And it's something that everybody should have access to. We'd always do long appointments through the pregnancy. So every time a woman sees their midwife, that might be in their own home. Private midwives tend to do a lot of home visits, or it might be they go to that midwife's clinic. Each appointment is usually about an hour, so it gives us lots of time to have lots of chats about women, go a bit more into depth into things, really build a relationship and a rapport with that woman, and do a lot of education. Like so much of that kind of birth prep we do, breastfeeding prep, preparing for postpartum, like we've got that time to do that through the pregnancy. And then having a known person with you during labour is just everything. It's such a kind of intimate, vulnerable time. To have someone that you already feel safe with is really crucial. And then the postpartum care, we give 6 weeks care afterwards. And anyone that doesn't have a private midwife is not going to get close to that. Like women that birth in the private system, they might have a little bit of a longer stay afterwards, but they don't get any midwife follow-up afterwards. If you birth in the public system, generally, you get 2 or 3 midwife visits afterwards. Usually it's 2, occasionally it's 1, coming to see you at home, and then you're kind of discharged after that. And you might see the maternal child health nurse the odd time, but you're missing out on that crucial midwifery care.
Yeah.
So to give that 6 weeks of care, like I would see my clients a lot in that time.
Yeah, I wondered if you tailor that. Like you've obviously got a structure that sits around what that looks like, but do you tailor that per client per se? So you see someone that needs, in these hour-long appointments, assumably you're going to be able to pick up on things that aren't bleedingly obvious when you're passing through the system quite quickly. So what does tailoring care look like for you as a private midwife?
Yeah. Oh, it's so individual, and that's the beauty of it. Like we know our clients so well. Like our clients, they're not just another number in the system. Like we really get to know that woman, but we also get to know her family. So we get to know, her partner, her other children, her whole family circumstances. And when you spend that amount of time with someone, women often will get to that point where they do feel comfortable opening up about things that they probably wouldn't open up about in a quick 15-minute appointment with someone they didn't really feel as comfortable with.
Yeah.
But the tailoring is in so many, like postpartum, it might just be, we do so different numbers of appointments with everyone. So it might be some women I'd see most days in the first week, and then maybe a couple times the next week, and then about once a week for 6 weeks. Some women might not need that level of intensity of appointments. Some women might just like the reassurance of just that check-in, even if everything is all going well. They just like to, have that friendly face pop in and just give that reassurance that all is going well. Some women need a lot of intensive support, particularly with things like breastfeeding. That's typically the thing that we spend a lot of time giving support with.
Yeah.
And we quite readily collaborate with a lot of other health practitioners, allied health as well.
It was certainly one of my questions. There's things that come up that, in that particularly intensive postpartum period, we certainly see it at home, as you know, that, if people just saw their private obstetrician or, their follow-up appointments 6 weeks later, then they may be missed. But you're connecting in with other specialists that kind of sit in that field.
Yeah.
Yeah.
definitely.
So, like, obviously that's a huge benefit as it is, like, not just your intensivity of care in that period, but the connections that you make afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and that could be anything. It might be lactation consultants, if it's more kind of breastfeeding things we want to tie in with, but it could be a whole range of different practitioners, like nutrition, and that woman making sure she's not depleted postpartum is really crucial.
Yeah.
It might be like bodywork practitioners, like osteos, for example, chiros, etc. Could be physios, so making sure that woman's pelvic floor health is really good afterwards, getting women into for those women's health physio appointments. So it could be so many different things, but definitely the midwifery practice that I worked at for a lot of years, we had a lot of allied health practitioners that work there at the centre. So it was kind of like a one-stop shop, and women could kind of easily connect in with all those different people.
And I guess along with that, you spoke about your own practice has kind of evolved. And you do some private midwifery with an obstetrician.
Yeah.
What does that look like?
So him and I work in partnership together. There's two different models of care that we offer. So anyone that's coming for private care there would have him as their primary caregiver. But some of their appointments through their pregnancy would be with me. We tend to alternate appointments. So you have one with him, the next one with me. My appointments are longer. So he does 15-minute appointments. I do 45-minute to an hour appointments. And I do focus a lot on education, but also just that relationship building, that holistic care, that, emotional health, etc. And then for all those clients, I then give them the 6 weeks postpartum care, because that's not an obstetrician's specialty. They're not trained to give breastfeeding support. So it's trying to kind of fill that gap that people within the private system are then missing out on that midwifery care. It's to try and fill that, so they're essentially getting the best of both worlds. If they want to go down the private route, then they're not going to miss out on having that midwifery care. I'm just not doing any on-call or birth work for those clients.
Got it. I did wonder whether being like you're sort of tapping in and out with the private obstetrician, whether you're present for birth. Is that like sometimes the case? It's a never, or
it's a never at the moment.
Yeah, okay.
I felt I really needed to step back from on-call work. Like, I'd spent 12 years, 11 years kind of working kind of in that on-call space. And the way I always worked it was 24/7.
Yeah.
There are now models that are a bit more sustainable where there's, rostered time off, but I always did it in a 24/7 model. And even just to be on call for one woman, there's a 5-week period where she could potentially have a baby. You term between 37 to 42 weeks, and that's if you birth at term. So it actually is a huge commitment, even if it's only one person. But then when you're committing to being available for all of the clients that are booked through us, I felt like I had to have quite a strict line at saying, I'm actually, as much as I'd love to, I'm just, for my health, I need to be off call and know that I can, plan things and be able to sleep at night and have a life. Exactly.
So where do you pick it up then? So potentially when they leave hospital, what does that look like for you with this private obstetrician, like integrative care that you're doing?
So every woman's a bit different with how much postpartum support she wants. So she can see me for unlimited appointments after she has baby up to that kind of 6-week mark. So I do home visits initially. So usually I go and do a couple of home visits, and then the woman can then come back into the clinic and start seeing me there, or we can continue doing home visits the whole time if she wants that. We've included everything within just a standard package she pays, so there's no extra cost to it for the woman. She can just utilize me as much or as little as she likes. And, some women need to see me a lot, and I'm there every week and see them a lot. And other women, they might have had babies before and they just feel quite confident with things. They might come in for the odd check-in, but I might not see them quite as much. But the other model that I do with working at the private obstetric clinic is I also take on my own shared care clients, which are nothing to do with the private obstetrician. So that's for women who are birthing in the public hospital. So a shared care model is where women would have most of their care kind of out of the hospital. So this is mostly for lower risk women. We would do shared care, but we can do variations of it for women that have different risk factors. But shared care is quite a common model that public hospitals offer, and typically women do that with GPs. But with GPs, it's not their specialty, pregnancy care. So women do miss out on quite a bit when they're not then seeing midwives. So shared care is something I've done the whole time I've been a private midwife. And it's where women would see me for the majority of their care. They'd have the odd hospital check-in, and then I see them for 6 weeks afterwards as well. So, like, it's the other kind of care option I offer for women kind of through that same obstetric clinic that I'm working at.
I gotcha. So given that your practice kind of varies, I feel like you're a bit of a guru in knowing where things might benefit, you know, women who are sitting in this space or people who are sitting in this space who are, you know, about to enter the healthcare system, be it what it is. At what stage of someone's reproductive journey should they engage a private midwife if that's what they want to do?
Oh, as early as possible. Definitely, we love to see women as soon as they find out they're pregnant. We can see them right from the start, and we can, you know, go through that whole first trimester with them. It's not that they need to wait until they've had any confirmation of anything. They can come straight to their midwife. We had some amazing changes happen at the end of last year, which mean that women no longer need a referral to see a private midwife. So they can now self-refer to private midwives, which is just so incredible. It removes that barrier of having to go via a GP first and then getting a referral, particularly if a GP hasn't maybe heard of private midwives and they're not sure kind of what they're referring to. So women can now just come straight to their midwife, and we can provide all of their care. And if we feel at any point in the pregnancy that anything goes out of our scope of practice, or if there's any risk factors that we feel would warrant obstetric opinion, then we would collaborate with an obstetrician on that. And we've got some wonderful obstetricians that we quite regularly collaborate with that are happy to see all of our home birth clients that aren't directly kind of booked with a hospital. And any client that is going through the hospital system, then we work with the obstetricians that work there.
Yeah, incredible. So what are some key things that you think in, like, given that you're private midwifing on your daily when you're not doing education and other sorts of things, working at home as well. What would you suggest if someone wanted to engage with a private midwife? What are they looking for and how do they do that?
Google is probably where most people are going to find their private midwives. There are sites set up that are like find a private midwife around, where you can type in your location and it kind of brings up private midwives in your area. My problem with that is they're maybe not all listed on there. It's about how kind of up to date that is. A lot of people find their midwives through word of mouth. That is kind of the main way. We generally get people that, you know, we've been recommended to them, and then, you know, they come. Some people want to just have an initial visit with a few different midwives and just get a feel, because...
Like an interview.
Yeah, exactly.
Testing the waters.
Yeah. Everyone's looking for something a bit different in their midwife. And one midwife, she might not be the right midwife for one woman, but she might be the perfect midwife for another woman. So, you know, it is always worth kind of meeting a few different midwives and just seeing who you click with and who you feel aligns kind of most with kind of your values and with what you're wanting.
Amazing. It sounds like the way that you work is very much an integrative space. Like you are constantly touching with other health professionals, whether it be, you know, other midwives or obstetricians when required, but then just handing on when it's, you know, you see something that is potentially maybe missed in many other circumstances. So.
Yeah. And the important thing is that even if we are collaborating with other health practitioners, we still very much remain part of that woman's care and their primary kind of point of contact for everything. So we'd never just handball a woman off to someone completely. Even if bigger risk factors and things did develop, we would still stand by her side throughout that whole process.
Yeah, amazing. I love that. The continuity of care is so appealing in what we know to be really quite a confronting experience, particularly from everything that I have certainly heard with people who are navigating the public health system. I guess knowing that can be a thing. What are your key things that you think the healthcare system in Australia, because you've worked in two different healthcare systems, how could that be better?
I think so. When women are pregnant, find out they're pregnant in Australia, typically their first point of contact is they go to a GP first, and then often that GP will say to them, right, do you want a private obstetrician or do you want to do shared care with me or another GP in the public hospital? And that's often the only two options women are given. So a lot of the time they're just not aware that there are actually lots of other options out there. I do think it starts with GPs, if that's where a lot of women are going to go to first, and having that awareness of midwifery care and knowing all of the benefits of midwifery care, because we do know it massively improves outcomes for mothers and babies. And I think valuing a midwife's role and kind of autonomy a bit more and letting midwives work within their full scope of practice it would be another important one. Women having access to more birthing options. In Victoria, we closed down all of the birth centres, so that was no longer an option for women. Everything was kind of centralised in these big obstetric units. I think having home birth as a more known about and accessible option is important.
Without that fear and stigma as well, I think certainly having worked in the healthcare system myself, I think that is certainly, we hear those horror stories and that's all we hear. We don't hear many of the positive things around situations that go incredibly well in that home birth.
There are a lot of misconceptions about home birth. We wish everyone knew what we know about home birth. Not because we think everybody should have a home birth. It's not going to be the right place for everybody. But we know from all the research that home birth is a very safe option. If it's a birth that's attended by 2 registered midwives, we carry a lot of equipment, drugs, etc. with us. We know the research shows that outcomes for mums from home birth are significantly better than the outcomes from hospital births. For babies, the outcomes are either similar to those babies born in hospital or better than those babies born in hospital. There's no outcome for mums or babies that is worse from being born at home. It's something that is very safe. We know that the countries in the world that have high rates of home birth and midwife-led care have the best outcomes for mums and babies. We know the more medicalised a country is, those outcomes tend to get worse. So I really wish I could shift the narrative a bit around it. I think the media reporting of home birth doesn't help. There's a lot of kind of biases going on there for people that actually don't really know anything about home birth. And I feel like negative stories that often get reported are generally from free births, which is women that have birthed without any midwives or any health professionals with them at all. And that often gets labelled as home birth in the media when it actually rarely is home birth. When you actually break it down and look at it, the majority of the time, those stories have come from free births. And we do sometimes have home birth transfers, but that doesn't mean that there's been any emergency at home. If midwives are transferring in from home, we think of that as, a positive thing. It's good management. Exactly. We transfer in before something. Exactly. We wouldn't transfer something in the midst of an emergency. We would, anticipate and go in when it's going to be more of a calm transfer rather than any big rush into hospital. But there are a few public hospitals that are now offering home birth programs, but they are still quite restrictive for women accessing them. There's a lot of criteria women have got to fit, and they're just oversubscribed as well. There's not as many places. And then, private home birth is generally the way most women would access a home birth, but then there's financial costs associated with that.
I guess as my last question, I would love to have your opinion on what you think the current state of postpartum care, like what do you think of the current state basically, and what do you think needs to change?
Oh, I'm so passionate about postpartum care. Like, this is my real love, is postpartum care. There is so much I would change. First of all, everybody should have access to 6 weeks of midwifery care. That should be the standard for everybody. That should be the bare minimum that people are receiving afterwards. And I think everyone should have access to lactation consultants in the community. There are some in the hospital. They're often very busy in the hospital and maybe don't have time to get around everybody. But it's that support when people are home once they've been discharged that is really, really lacking. I think a lot of women nowadays are often missing that village community. Women are often a bit more isolated than what we used to be. People move around a lot more. Like even me, all my family are in the UK. I don't have any family around me. And I think a lot is expected of women afterwards. I feel like women feel like they have to do it all, and they've got a huge mental load, and they've got, just a lot to be doing afterwards. And so much of the kind of so-called support that gets put out there is things that actually just creates a big disconnect between the mum and the baby. My passion is about trying to keep mums and babies together and connected and creating that really secure attachment, but having the mother really held and really supported in that. A mother, after having a baby, shouldn't have to think about anything or do anything. She should have everyone around her nurturing her and supporting her so that she can just be skin to skin with her baby and having her baby on and off the breast all day and just be cuddled up in bed together and not have that stress or load of anything. And she should have all those services available to her if she is struggling with anything. It shouldn't be difficult to access anything afterwards. And I think particularly breastfeeding support, that's a big passion of mine. A lot of women want to breastfeed, and a lot of women stop breastfeeding because they didn't get the support and they were just told that, they maybe couldn't produce a full milk supply, which is actually such a rare thing, to physically not be able to produce a full milk supply. It generally is the support that woman was given, and she probably wasn't taught to latch her baby correctly and feed frequently enough and taught about the physiology of that. So I think education's really important, and just that support afterwards. And that support can come from different places. Definitely midwifery support, lactation consultants, but doula support is really important. And if you give birth somewhere like the Netherlands, for every day for a couple of weeks after you give birth, you have midwives and doulas coming to see you, and the doulas do all the things around the house for you and fully look after you and hold you, and that's all government funded. That's all part of their public system. We don't value that postpartum care in Australia. It's kind of missing. There's that kind of focus a bit more on the pregnancy care, and then it's kind of like the postpartum bit's forgotten about, and women are kind of left to it. And there's also nowhere near enough paid maternity leave, which I think is a huge issue. There's significantly less here in Australia compared to the UK. There's some European countries that have 2 years of paid maternity leave.
It's crazy when you think about that, and the expectation it is to get back to life.
Exactly.
Despite the fact that it's been turned upside down, really.
Yeah, exactly.
I have loved talking to you and hearing how passionate you are about this space. We love having you at home.
Oh, thank you. I love working at home.
And it's been great just to find out a little bit more about your journey and what private midwifery looks like and how essential it is. Thanks so much, Rachel.
Thank you for having me.
This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and their guest speakers. Views and opinions expressed in the podcast are our own and do not represent that of our places of work. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and content here should not be taken as medical or professional advice. Please consult your healthcare professional for any personal recommendations and medical care. while we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate based on the best available information at the time of recording, we welcome any comments, suggestions or feedback via our website contact form, home.com.au/contact. Names and details of personal experiences may have been changed to allow for anonymity and privacy. To join the conversation, join us on social media at Home Postpartum.